"Come with me," the ex-Delta Force said, after seeing the widow and her family in the blizzard. She had $13, a quarter tank of gas, and 2 children asleep in the back of a dying Subaru when the blizzard swallowed Route 191 whole. The windshield wipers seized first. Then the engine coughed, sputtered, and quit, and Clara Voss sat in the sudden, ringing silence of a woman who had run out of every single thing: money, fuel, road, and the stubborn belief that she could outrun what was chasing her. Her 5-year-old daughter, Bee, clutched a stuffed rabbit missing one ear. Her 7-year-old son, Jonah, had his arm around his sister even in sleep. Clara pressed her forehead to the steering wheel and felt the cold already crawling through the floorboards. Behind her, somewhere on the other side of whiteout darkness, her dead husband's brother was still coming. And ahead of her, standing beside a black truck idling on the shoulder with its hazard lights cutting amber slashes through the snow, was a man she had never seen before. Tall, wide-shouldered, his jaw tight against the wind, his bare hands already reaching for her door. He didn't ask permission, he didn't introduce himself. He looked at the children, he looked at her, and the first thing he ever said to Clara Voss was, "Come with me, right now." This is the story of a widow with a secret that could save a soldier's life, and a soldier whose love would prove she never committed the crime that stole everything she had. The cold hit her face the instant he opened the driver's door. Not ordinary cold. Wet, biting, granular, the kind that finds the gap between collar and neck and settles there with intent. Clara jerked back. His hand was on the doorframe, not on her, and she registered that fact before she registered anything else about him. Scarred knuckles, no gloves, a dark canvas jacket that wasn't nearly heavy enough for this weather, and his eyes, steady, assessing, cataloguing her the way she'd seen paramedics catalogue a scene, not with pity, with triage. "Your engine's dead," he said. His voice was low, roughened, direct. "Temperature's dropping 12 degrees an hour. You have about 40 minutes before this car can't hold heat." "I know." Clara's hands were still on the wheel. She could feel Jonah stirring behind her, the rustle of his coat against the seat. "Who are you?" "Eli Maddox. I have a cabin 6 miles north. 4-wheel drive, full tank, wood stove already lit. I can take all 3 of you there, or I can call County Search and Rescue, but dispatch said they're 90 minutes out. Your call. I won't touch you or them until you say, 'Your call.'" 2 words that almost broke her, because for 9 months, nothing had been her call. Not the funeral arrangements Grant's brother Wade had hijacked, not the life insurance payout Wade had contested, not the custody motion Wade had filed 3 weeks ago claiming she was an unfit mother, neglectful, unstable, possibly complicit in Grant's death. She'd fled Billings with the children, a duffel bag, and the $13 left in an account Wade hadn't managed to freeze. Clara turned to look at Bee and Jonah. Bee's lips were already faintly blue. Jonah's eyes were open now, watching the stranger at the door with the wary, prematurely old expression he'd worn since the day his father died. "Mom?" he said. She faced Eli Maddox. "We'll come." He nodded once. No triumph, no softening. He stepped back, giving her space to climb out. She opened the rear door herself, unbuckled Bee herself, lifted her daughter against her chest. Eli reached for the duffel bag on the passenger seat, then stopped. He looked at her. "May I carry that?" "Yes," she said. He slung it over one shoulder. Jonah climbed out on his own, took Clara's coat hem in his fist, and they walked single file through driving snow to the black truck. The cab was warm. Not just warm, aggressively warm, the heater blasting on high, the seats radiating stored heat that seeped through Clara's jeans and into the muscles of her thighs. She pressed Bee against her body and felt the girl's small fingers unclench, one by one, from the stuffed rabbit. Jonah sat between them and Eli, rigid, silent, watching every move the man made. Eli drove without speaking, both hands on the wheel, 10 and 2, his jaw working beneath skin that looked wind-burned even in the dashboard light. She noticed his left hand. A pale scar ran from the base of his thumb to his wrist, surgical, precise, old. He caught her looking. "IED," he said. "Kandahar. 2017, still works, just ugly. She looked away. The snow hit the windshield in thick, wet clumps, and the wipers beat a steady rhythm she felt in her sternum. 6 miles took 20 minutes. The cabin appeared between pines, small, squared, smoke already threading from a chimney pipe. He pulled close to the porch, killed the engine, came around to her side, opened the door, stepped back. Kitchen's through the front room. There's soup on the stove. Canned, nothing fancy. Bedroom's on the right. I'll sleep out here in the truck. You'll freeze, Clara said. Done it before. There's a couch, Jonah said suddenly, and both adults looked at him. He had his chin up, his jaw set in a miniature version of his father's stubborn face. You can sleep on the couch. That's fair. Eli studied the boy. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not softness exactly. Recognition. Fair enough, he said. Inside, the wood stove threw copper-colored heat across plank floors. Clara set Bea on the couch, pulled a wool blanket from the back, tucked it around her daughter's body. The girl's color was already coming back. Jonah stood by the door, still watching Eli, who moved through his own space with the contained economy of a man used to not taking up room. He ladled soup into 3 mugs, not bowls, mugs, because small hands hold mugs, and set them on the table. Clara, he said. It was the first time he used her name. She hadn't told it to him. He must have seen the registration when he opened her door. She looked up. The road won't clear until morning. County plows start at 6. You're safe here tonight. He said it like a fact. Not a promise, not a reassurance. A fact, delivered with the same flat certainty as the temperature drop. She believed him. They ate in silence. Bea fell asleep with the mug still in her hands, and Clara carried her to the bedroom, laid her on the quilt, pulled Jonah in beside her. She stood in the doorway and watched Eli building the fire higher, stacking split pine with his scarred hands, and she saw the slight tremor in his left one. Not cold. Something else. He caught her watching again. Go to sleep, Clara. She did. Morning came white and glaring. Clara found Eli on the porch, phone to his ear, his breath visible in hard, short clouds. He hung up when he saw her. Road's open but slow. I can drive you wherever you're headed, but there's something you need to know. He put the phone in his pocket. A man called the gas station in Garnet last night, asking about a woman in a blue Subaru with 2 kids. Gave your plate number. Said he was your brother-in-law and you'd kidnapped his niece and nephew. He let that sit. Station owner's a friend of mine. He didn't tell him anything, but he told me. Clara's stomach dropped so fast she gripped the porch rail. Eli didn't move toward her. I'm not asking what happened, he said. I'm telling you what's out there. If you want to keep driving, I'll help you. If you want to stay until you have a plan, you can stay. He paused. The scar on his hand caught the light. I don't let people hurt kids. That's not negotiable. He filed for custody, Clara said. The words came out scraped and raw. He told the court I was negligent, that I caused Grant's death. I didn't. But he has the money and the lawyers, and I have $13. 12 now, Eli said. You left $1 in the cup holder. The laugh that came out of her was sharp and broken, and she pressed her hand over her mouth. Stay, he said. I have a spare room. I have food. I've got a lawyer buddy in Helena who does pro bono family work. We'll figure this out. Why? Because you asked your kids permission before you got in my truck. He turned and went inside. They stayed. 1 night became 3. 3 became 5. Clara took over the kitchen, not because he asked, but because cooking gave her hands something to do besides shake. She found his pantry military neat, cans label forward, rice in sealed containers, everything squared. His medicine cabinet, which she opened looking for children's Tylenol, held prescription bottles she recognized. Prazosin, for nightmares. Propranolol, for the tremor. She closed the cabinet quietly. On the 4th night, she heard him through the wall. Not screaming. Worse. Controlled breathing, fast and rhythmic. The sound of a man fighting his own nervous system with techniques someone had drilled into him. She pressed her palm flat against the wall between their rooms and listened until it stopped. Wade arrived on day 6. She heard the truck before she saw it. Oversized, diesel, crunching gravel like teeth. She was in the kitchen. Bea was drawing at the table. Jonah was on the porch with Eli, learning to split kindling. Clara went to the window. Wade climbed out. 6'2", expensive boots, the same square jaw Grant had worn softer. He saw Jonah first. Then he saw Eli standing behind him, the axe still in his hand, and he stopped. "Clara." Wade pitched his voice to Carrie. "I've been worried sick. The children need to come home." Eli set the axe down. He stepped in front of Jonah, not aggressively, just forward, placing his body between the boy and the man in the driveway. "This is private property," he said. "You weren't invited." "I don't need an invitation to collect my brother's children from a stranger's cabin in the middle of nowhere." "They're not your children," Clara said from the porch. She'd come outside without deciding to. Her voice was steady, and she was surprised by that. "They're mine, and I have a court date in 3 weeks. You won't make it to court." Wade's voice dropped, and the threat in it was casual, practiced, the voice of a man who'd learned that money and volume could replace reason. "I'll have an emergency order by Friday. Abandonment, flight across state lines, exposing minors to an unknown male." "My name's Eli Maddox," Eli said. "Sergeant First Class, retired, 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. Currently a registered foster care volunteer with Granite County. Background checked, fingerprinted, and stone-cold sober for 11 years. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't moved. You're welcome to verify that. You're not welcome on my porch." Wade's face mottled red. He looked at Clara with the particular fury of a man who'd expected compliance and found a wall instead. "This isn't over." "It isn't," Eli agreed. "Drive safe. Roads are icy." Wade left. Clara's hands didn't start shaking until his truck was gone, and then they shook badly enough that she couldn't hold the mug Eli handed her. He didn't take her hands. He set the mug on the table and sat across from her and waited. "He controlled Grant," Clara whispered. "The business, the money, everything. Grant wanted out. Grant found the discrepancies in the accounts. Wade was laundering money through their father's construction company. Grant confronted him 2 days before the accident." She swallowed. "It wasn't an accident. I found Grant's notes, hidden in our basement, behind the water heater. Account numbers, transfer records, dates. That's what Wade wants. Not the children. He wants to make sure I never testify." Eli's left hand trembled on the table. He pressed it flat. "Where are the notes now?" "In the lining of Bea's rabbit." He looked at her. Then he looked at the stuffed rabbit sitting on the couch, missing one ear, its belly lumpy with something harder than stuffing. "Clara Voss," he said quietly. "You are something." That night, after the children were asleep, she found him on the couch staring at the wood stove. The firelight turned the scar on his hand copper and gold. She sat beside him. Not close. A foot of space between them. He didn't close it. "You're shaking again," she said. "Yeah. The prazosin isn't enough." He turned his head. "You went through my medicine cabinet. I was looking for Tylenol." "I'm sorry. Don't be." He flexed his scarred hand open, closed, open. "It's getting worse. The tremor, the nightmares. My buddy at the VA says there's a surgical option. Nerve block. But I'd lose fine motor in the left hand permanently. No more splitting wood, no more engine work." He paused. "Probably can't hold a kid." "There's another option," Clara said. She said it before she could stop herself, before the careful walls she'd built around her first life could hold. "I was a neurological physical therapist. Before Grant, before everything. I specialized in trauma-induced tremor. There's a protocol, targeted desensitization combined with manual nerve manipulation. It's not surgery. It takes weeks, and it requires daily contact, and the success rate is about 70%. She stopped. I lost my license when Wade reported me to the board for mental instability. That's one of the things he did. Eli was quiet for a long time. The fire cracked. His hand trembled on his thigh. "Would you try?" he said. "Yes, then try." She started the next day. The protocol required her to hold his left hand, palm up, fingers extended, and work through the nerve pathways with precise, graduated pressure. She sat facing him on the bedroom floor, his hand in both of hers, and she felt the tremor running through him like current. She pressed her thumb into the base of his palm, and his breath changed. "Tell me if anything hurts." "Nothing hurts." His voice was rough. She worked for 20 minutes. Her thumbs traced the surgical scar, found the knotted tissue beneath, pressed and released in patterns she'd memorized a decade ago. His tremor slowed. Didn't stop, but slowed. When she looked up, his eyes were on her face, and the expression in them was so raw and unguarded that her hands stilled. "Don't stop," he said. "Please." She didn't stop. She worked for another 15 minutes, and by the end, his hand was nearly still. He turned it over in hers, looked at his own fingers as if they belonged to someone else, and then he curled them gently, carefully, around hers. "Is this okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said. Her pulse was visible in her throat, and she knew he could see it. He lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to her knuckles. One kiss. Closed-lipped, deliberate, and so controlled she could feel the restraint in every muscle of his jaw. Then he set her hand back in her lap. "Thank you," he said, and stood, and walked out of the room, and she sat on the floor with her hand burning where his mouth had been, and her body aching with something she hadn't felt in so long she'd forgotten its name. 2 nights later, she went to him. The children were asleep. The cabin was dark except for the stove's glow. He was lying on the couch, one arm over his eyes, and she knew he wasn't sleeping because his breathing was too controlled, that same deliberate rhythm she'd heard through the wall. "Eli." He moved his arm, looked at her. She was wearing a flannel shirt she'd borrowed from his closet, and nothing underneath it, and she watched him realize that, watched his gaze track down to her bare legs and back up to her face, watched the muscle in his jaw flex hard. "Clara, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to. Do you?" "God, yes." The words came out of him rough and raw. He sat up. The blanket fell to his waist. He was shirtless, and his body was what she'd expected, scarred, hard-used, mapped with damage and recovery, a puckered burn on his left shoulder, a long surgical line down his right side. He was breathing fast now, and he pressed his palms against his knees as if holding himself in place. She crossed the room. She stood in front of him, and the heat from the wood stove hit the backs of her legs, her calves, the skin behind her knees. He looked up at her, and his pupils were blown wide in the firelight, and his scarred hand was trembling again. "I need you to tell me what you want," he said. "Every step. I won't assume. I won't take." She put her hands on his shoulders. His skin was hot, furnace hot, as if the fire inside his body ran hotter than it should. She felt the tension beneath her palms, the coiled control, the way he held himself absolutely still while she touched him. "I want you to touch me," she said. His hands came up, slowly. He placed them on her hips over the flannel, and the heat of his palms burned through the fabric. His thumbs traced the bones of her hips, and she inhaled sharply, and his grip tightened, then released. "Still okay?" "Yes, more." He slid his hands up her sides, gathering the flannel as he went, and the air hit her bare stomach, her ribs, the underside of her breasts. He stopped there. His breathing was ragged now, visible in the rise and fall of his chest, and his scarred left hand shook against her skin. "Your hand," she whispered. "Ignore it." "No." She took his left hand and pressed it flat over her heart. The tremor moved through her. She felt it in her sternum, in the thin skin over her collarbone, in the pulse that jumped beneath his palm. "Feel that?" "My heart's shaking too." He made a sound, not a word, A sound from deep in his chest, involuntary and wrecked. He pulled her down onto his lap and she went, straddling him on the narrow couch, the flannel riding up to her hips. His mouth found her throat and the heat of it made her gasp. He kissed a line from her jaw to her collarbone, slow, open-mouthed, tasting her skin, and his hands spread across her back, one steady, one trembling, holding her against him. "Can I take this off?" His fingers found the top button of the flannel. Yes. He undid the buttons one by one, slowly. His scarred hand fumbled the third one, and he cursed under his breath, and she covered his hand with hers and helped him in the act of doing it together. His damaged fingers and her steady ones working the same button was more intimate than anything she'd felt in years. The flannel fell open, and he pushed it off her shoulders, and she was bare from the waist up in the copper light of the stove. He looked at her. He looked at her with such undisguised hunger and reverence that she felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them back. "You're shaking," she said. Not his hand this time, all of him. "Yeah." He put his mouth on her collarbone and breathed against her skin. "I've wanted to touch you since the first night. Didn't think I'd earned it. You earned it the second you stepped back from my car door." His hands tightened on her waist. He pulled her closer, and she rocked against him and felt him hard beneath her, and the sound he made was guttural, strained, a man losing a fight with his own restraint. She pulled at his belt, and he lifted his hips to help her, and they struggled with it together, laughing suddenly, breathlessly, because the buckle was stiff, and her hands were clumsy, and his left hand was useless for fine motor, and the absurdity of two desperate people defeated by a belt buckle cut through the tension and replaced it with something better. Something human. Then the belt was open, and she pushed his jeans down, and he kicked them off, and pulled her flush against him, and the shock of skin on skin. Her bare chest against his scarred one, her thighs around his hips, the heat of him against the heat of her, made them both go still. "Tell me," he said against her mouth. "Now. Please, now." He lifted her, adjusted, guided himself, and she sank onto him slowly, and the sound she made was raw and broken and real. His hands gripped her hips, one steady, one shaking, and he pressed his forehead against her sternum and breathed her name. She moved. He moved with her. The couch creaked beneath them, and the fire popped, and the snow outside fell in thick silence, and she held his face in her hands and kissed him while their bodies found a rhythm that was desperate and graceless and absolutely necessary. He whispered questions against her skin. "Is this good? Can I? Tell me." And she answered every one with her hands, her hips, her voice cracking on the word yes. When she came apart, she buried her face in his neck and he held her through it, his arms wrapped around her shaking body, his scarred hand pressed flat against her spine. When he followed, he said her name, just her name, Clara, and the way it sounded in his broken voice was the most honest thing she'd heard in years. After, he pulled the blanket over both of them. She expected him to speak. He didn't. He pressed his mouth to her temple, and his left hand rested on her bare hip, and for the first time since she'd known him, the tremor was gone. She lay against his chest and listened to his heartbeat slow, and then he was asleep, suddenly, completely, the way soldiers sleep when they finally feel safe. She did not move. She stayed against him all night, with the fire dying and the cold creeping in, and his body warming hers, and when Bea padded out at dawn in sock feet and found them on the couch, Clara pulled the blanket higher and whispered, "Go back to bed, baby." And Bea said, "Is that man keeping you warm?" And Clara said, "Yes." And Bea said, "Good," and went back to bed. Clara extracted herself slowly, mortified suddenly by the intimacy of her own eagerness, the way she'd crossed the room to him, the way she'd straddled him, the way she'd said, "Now, please, now." She dressed in the bathroom and avoided her own reflection, and made coffee with her face burning. Eli appeared at the kitchen doorway, dressed, his hair wrecked, a look on his face she couldn't read. "Clara." "Coffee's ready." "Clara, look at me." She looked. He was watching her with that same raw expression from last night, unguarded, defenseless in a way that looked wrong on a man built like a weapon. "I don't regret that," he said. "Do you?" "No. I'm embarrassed." Why? Because I came to you. Because I wanted it. Because I'm a widow with 2 children sleeping 20 feet away, and I wanted to feel alive. She stopped. She pressed her lips together and nodded. That's not something to be embarrassed about. Later that morning, Janet Pruitt, Eli's neighbor, a 72-year-old former rodeo queen who delivered eggs every Tuesday, cornered Clara on the porch while Eli was chopping wood. He slept through the night, Janet said. Not a question. Clara blushed so violently she felt it in her ears. Excuse me? I've known that boy 8 years. He hasn't slept a full night since Kandahar. Whatever you did, do it again. Janet set the egg carton down and leaned closer. Listen to me, honey. That man is wound so tight he's going to shake apart. You want to help him? Exhaust him. I mean it. Wear him out. Take what you need and give him the one thing nobody else can, a reason to let go. Janet, I barely know him. You knew him well enough last night. Clara covered her face with both hands. Janet patted her shoulder and left. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara did not wait for doubt. She walked to the couch where he sat reading, took the book out of his hands, set it on the floor, and climbed into his lap. His eyebrows went up. His hands settled on her thighs. Clara? Shut up, she said, and kissed him, and felt his surprise become surrender in the span of a single breath. She took her time. She undressed him slowly, cataloguing every scar with her mouth, and when he reached for her, she pressed his hands back against the couch and said, Not yet. She explored him until he was wrecked, sweating, shaking, his head tipped back, his breath coming in harsh gasps, his good hand white-knuckled on the cushion. Then she let him touch her, and he did, urgent, desperate, reverent, and she guided him inside her, and they moved together until he broke apart beneath her with a sound that was closer to a sob than anything else. He fell asleep in less than 2 minutes, his arms locked around her, his face in her hair. She pulled the blanket over them both and listened to him breathe. No controlled rhythm, no forced calm, just deep, even dreamless sleep. In the morning he woke before her. She opened her eyes and found him watching her, his scarred hand resting on the pillow beside her face, not touching her, just close. Can I make you breakfast? He asked. You don't have to. I want to. Can I? Yes. He made eggs. He made them perfectly. Over the next week, she treated his hand every day. The tremor diminished, then stabilized, then began to disappear. But she noticed other things. His sleep, despite their nights together, was deteriorating again. He sweated through his shirt at night. His pulse, under her fingers during treatment, was too fast. His scarred hand grew hot, not warm, hot, feverish hot, and when she pressed the nerve pathways, she could feel inflammation that shouldn't have been there. How long has the fever been going on? She asked during a session, her thumb against his wrist. Couple months. You didn't mention that. Didn't seem relevant. Eli, your body is attacking the scar tissue. It's an autoimmune response. The tremor isn't just nerve damage. It's active inflammation. Without treatment, you'll lose function in this hand entirely. She paused. Within months, not years. He was quiet. Then, so the nerve block wouldn't have worked anyway. No. It would have made it worse. And you can fix this? I can try, but I need supplies I don't have, equipment, a proper protocol, and I need my license back. She pulled her hands away from his. Which I can't get, because Wade reported me to the board using forged complaints from patients I never treated. It's in the custody file. It's part of his case. Proof that I'm unstable, unfit, dangerous. Clara. Eli leaned forward. The documents in B's Rabbit. Do they include anything about the board complaint? They include everything. Grant found all of it. The laundering, the forged complaints, the falsified accident report. Wade paid a mechanic to cut Grant's brake lines and then paid a coroner to rule it mechanical failure. It's all there. Dates, account numbers, names. I've been carrying the evidence that clears my name and convicts Wade in a stuffed rabbit for 9 months, and I couldn't use it because the moment I came forward, he'd take my children. They talked until 2 in the morning. Eli called his lawyer friend in Helena. She called the neurologist she'd trained under in Portland. They built a plan, piece by piece, sitting cross-legged on the bedroom floor, with Grant's handwritten notes spread between them like a map out of hell. 3 weeks later, the morning of the custody hearing, Clara stood in the cabin kitchen and watched Eli button his shirt with steady hands. Both of them steady. The treatment was working. The inflammation had responded to the protocol she'd designed with borrowed equipment and sheer, furious expertise, and his left hand hadn't trembled in 6 days. But his color was wrong, pale beneath the tan. His pulse, when she'd checked it that morning, was thready and fast. The autoimmune response was flaring. She could see it in the feverish heat of his scar, in the sweat along his hairline, in the way he gripped the counter when he thought she wasn't looking. "You need to see a doctor," she said, after the hearing. "Eli." After, at the courthouse, Wade was already there. Suit, lawyer, the smooth expression of a man who owned the room. He saw Clara, and his eyes went to Eli, and something shifted in his face. Not fear exactly, but calculation. The hearing lasted an hour. Wade's lawyer presented the case: abandonment, flight, exposure of minors to an unvetted male, history of mental instability as documented by the medical board. Clara's pro bono lawyer, a quiet woman named Wren with reading glasses and a spine of steel, presented counter-evidence, character witnesses, foster care records, Janet Pruitt's testimony about the children's well-being. Then Clara stood up. "Before we continue," she said, "I need to say something." Wren looked alarmed. Eli looked at her from the gallery with his jaw tight and his scarred hand pressed against his thigh. "I have evidence that my husband's death was not an accident," Clara said. "I have evidence that the complaints filed against my medical license were fabricated, and I have evidence that Wade Voss has been laundering money through Voss Construction for 7 years. I've had this evidence for 9 months, and I didn't come forward because I was afraid he'd take my children. I'm coming forward now because—" She looked at Eli, "because someone showed me that protecting people and hiding from people are not the same thing." She gave Wren the documents, all of them. The handwritten notes, the account numbers, the transfer records, the forged complaints, the mechanic's name, the coroner's payment. Everything she'd hidden in a stuffed rabbit's belly for 9 months. Wade stood up. "Your Honor, this is fabricated. This is—" "Clara, you know this is lies." Grant was confused. He was— "Sit down, Mr. Voss," the judge said. And then Eli collapsed. Clara saw it from the front of the courtroom, the way his knees buckled, the way his hand shot out for the bench back and missed, the way he went down hard on the courtroom floor. She was running before anyone else moved. She dropped beside him, and his eyes were open but unfocused, and his left hand was seizing, clenching and unclenching in rhythmic spasms, and the scar on his palm was burning. She could feel it through her fingers, furnace hot, his body attacking itself. "Eli. Eli, look at me. Clara." His voice was a wreck. "I need to tell you. I was going to say it this morning. I should have said it. His eyes rolled back. His body went rigid. "Call 911, Clara screamed. But she didn't wait. She grabbed his left hand and pressed into the nerve pathways. Hard, precise, the emergency protocol she'd been designing in her head for days because she'd known this was coming. She'd seen the signs, and he wouldn't listen. She worked the inflamed tissue with her thumbs, forcing blood flow, breaking the spasm cycle, and she talked to him the entire time. Not medical talk, not calm professional instruction, but desperate, raw, honest words. "You don't get to die in a courtroom, Eli Maddox. You don't get to collapse before you finish a sentence. I am a neurological physical therapist, and I am telling you that your body does not get to do this. Not today, not while I'm here. Not while your hand finally stopped shaking because of me." She pressed harder. The nerve pathways responded. She felt the spasm break, felt it physically under her thumbs, the knotted tissue releasing, the inflammation receding like a tide. His hand opened. His breathing steadied. His eyes focused on her face. There, she whispered. "There, come back." He breathed. He blinked. His hand lay open in hers, the scar fading from furious red to pale pink, and his fingers curled slowly, weakly, around her own. The paramedics arrived. They tried to move her, and she refused. She rode in the ambulance with his hand in hers, working the nerve pathways, stabilizing the inflammation, and she did not let go. At the hospital, while Eli slept in the ER with an 4 in his arm and Clara's hand still wrapped around his, 2 county deputies arrived at the courthouse. Wade was still there. He'd tried to leave. Janet Pruitt, 72 years old, and built from rodeo dust and righteous fury, had blocked the courtroom door with her body and her egg crate, and told him that if he moved 1 inch, she'd give him a reason to need his own lawyer. "Mr. Voss," the first deputy said, "we have a warrant for your arrest." "This is absurd. Those documents are forged. My brother was mentally ill. Clara manipulated him." "Wade." Janet set the egg crate down. "Your brother wasn't mentally ill. Your brother was the only decent thing your family ever produced, and you killed him because he found out you're a thief. I know because he told me. He came to my house the day before he died and told me everything, and I wrote it down, and I gave it to Wren 6 days ago because Clara Voss finally had the courage to fight you, and I wasn't going to let her fight alone." Wade's face went white, not the white of fear, the white of exposure, of a man who had built his power on silence, watching the silence end. "You can't prove—" "The mechanic talked," the deputy said. "He's been talking for 3 hours. We have the coroner's payment records. We have the bank transfers. And we have a sworn statement from your own accountant, who decided this morning that prison for fraud was better than prison for accessory to murder." Wade sat down. He put his hands on the table in front of him and stared at them and said nothing. "Wade Voss," the deputy continued, "you are under arrest for the murder of Grant Voss, for fraud, for money laundering, for filing false reports, for tampering with a medical licensing board, and for the falsification of evidence in a custody proceeding. You have the right to remain silent." Wade remained silent. It was the first honest thing he'd done in years. They handcuffed him. They walked him out. Janet Pruitt watched him go with her arms crossed and her chin up and her eyes bright with tears she refused to let fall. In the hospital, Eli woke at dusk. Clara was in the chair beside his bed, his left hand still in hers, and when his eyes opened she saw clarity in them. Real clarity, not the fevered, burning focus of the last 2 weeks. "Clara." "I'm here. I was trying to say something. In the courtroom. I know. Can I finish?" "Yes." He lifted their joined hands. His left one, scarred, surgical, rebuilt, was steady. No tremor, no heat, just his hand, warm and alive and holding hers. "I love you," he said. "Full. Unbroken. I love your kids. I love the way you put evidence in a rabbit. I love the way you fixed my hand by being too stubborn to let me lose it. I love you, Clara Voss." She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. The scar on his palm lay against her cheek, and it was cool, finally blessedly cool, and his fingers were steady, and his heartbeat under her other hand was strong and even. "I love you too," she said. 6 months later, the cabin had a second bedroom. Eli built it himself. Both hands, no tremor, plank floors and a window facing the pines. Jonah helped with the framing. Bee supervised from a beanbag chair with a rebuilt rabbit that now had both ears. Clara's license was reinstated. She opened a practice in Garnett, specializing in trauma-induced neurological conditions, and her first patient was a 24-year-old Marine who hadn't stopped shaking since Helmand Province. She held his hand and pressed the nerve pathways and told him about a man she knew who'd stood in a blizzard with bare hands and an open door. Wade was convicted on all counts. The trial lasted 11 days. Grant's name was cleared. The life insurance was released. Clara donated half of it to the County Veterans Services Program and used the other half to buy the land adjacent to Eli's cabin because the man had terrible boundaries and the deer kept eating her garden. On the anniversary of the blizzard, Eli drove her back to the spot on Route 191 where her Subaru had died. The road was clear. The sun was out. He parked on the shoulder and walked around to her door and opened it and stepped back. "You coming?" he asked. She took his hand, his left hand, scarred and steady, and stepped out into the light. If this story moved you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Every like, every comment, every share tells me to keep writing these for you. I'll see you in the next one.